Hi, Terry here, and welcome to Times Gone Tech. So, as you've seen in the introduction, I've done a new weapons build, which I'm calling my World War I Trench Club. And today I'm going to be talking about it in a little more detail, as well as show you very quickly how it was made. Now, I say very quickly because there isn't that much to it. It's really very simple. Then I'm going to come back here and we're going to talk about it in just a little more detail. Okay, so that's how it was made. Now, why do I say I'm calling it a World War I trench club? I mean, either it is or it isn't, right? And I know there are some people out there who are already on their keyboards typing away saying this is not a World War I trench club because I've never seen anything like this in a museum. And I've never seen another YouTube video of anybody making anything that looks anything like this and calling it a trench club. Well, if you don't think this is a trench club, you're right. And if you believe it's a trench club, you're right. Going to get into that here in just a little bit. But first, let me explain why is this not a trench club? Well, it's not because it's really kind of a fantasy weapon. It incorporates elements from different cultures, from different time periods, and even different locations around the world, which would have never had any contact with each other in the real world. So in that respect, it is a kind of a fantasy weapon. So let me get into that part of this design. First, let's start with this end, which is the handle. This is a 7/8 inch oak dowel rod. And as you can see, it's wrapped with rawhide for reinforcing. It's got an iron butt plate here for whacking people coming up behind you. And this is actually reminiscent of North American Plains Indian stone-headed war clubs. Their war clubs were actually very light in design. So this looks kind of flimsy, kind of light and flimsy, easily breakable by the standards that we're used to of the medieval European all steel flanged war mace. It was designed to go up against a knight in that really 15th, 16th century heavy plate armor. Now, this thing wouldn't even make a dent in that, but this wasn't designed for that. This is more akin to the Native American Plains Indians clubs, which were very light. In effect, they were just a small stone, sometimes deliberately shaped into a point to focus the amount of energy, sometimes not, sometimes just a rock, lashed onto the end of a slender stick with rawhide, and then that stick itself was reinforced with more rawhide. And that's what this is. By itself, this would probably break with the very first good hard blow against somebody's shield, or if I missed, a wall or a tree or something. But the thing about rawhide is when it's wet, it stretches very nicely. And then when it dries, it both shrinks and it hardens up. It gets really hard and really strong. So this rawhide is stretched really tightly around this wood, and it is dried out incredibly hard. So it's deceptively flimsy. It's slender and light, but it's actually very strong. It's quite capable of what it was designed to be used for, which is going up against a either lightly armored opponent or an opponent wearing no armor at all, like you might run into in a World War I trench in Europe. So looking more at the business end. Oh, wait a minute. Before that, let's have another look at the handle here. As you can see, this is designed, at least it looks like it's designed, to have a two-handed grip. But that would be a mistake because it would probably break. And there's another reason why you really don't want to use a hand weapon like this with two hands. A two-handed weapon, other than maybe a poleaxe or something, is a really bad idea. Because let's say that I'm coming up at an opponent and I've got both hands here and I'm going to take him down and I swing with all I've got and I miss. Oops. Look where my head is and my back. Wide open for any counterattack he wants to give me, which means I'm dead. What you really want to use these is one-handed, and I'm going to do this left-handed, but in reality it would have been right-handed, but I'm a left-handed person. So you'd be holding it in one hand and have ideally a shield in the other. And you would use the power of the weapon, its momentum, to your advantage, so that if I miss, instead of being just thrown completely off balance and out of kilter, I can use the momentum to bring it back around, counterattack, or block the opponent's counterattack. I can hold it down toward the bottom for more reach, more power, or I can choke up on it a little bit and get better control inside tight, confined spaces, like in a trench. That's really what that's designed for. This is not designed to be used with two hands. I mean, you got your opponent down, you've been clobbering each other, half to death. He's down in the mud, and you could give the coup de grace with it, but I think in reality, I would more likely give it like that. And this would give plenty of power. That's not a problem. So let's look at this end. Little unusual. This is what's known as a disc-headed mace type of end. And I want to talk about that just a little bit. The disc-headed mace shows up primarily in Egypt during the late Neolithic period, around 3700 BC, but we do find some examples of something like the Egyptian style in North Central Europe, but even as far west as South America. They are known primarily for being flat on the top and then tapering in from the bottom out to a very thin, fine edge. They disappear from use right around the time bronze becomes introduced, around 3300 BC, and they just disappear. And we don't really know why, because actually, you would think bronze would be a far better material suited to making a disc-headed mace than stone would be. You could just cast the shape, for one, instead of having to laboriously work it out of a block of stone. And then if it ever got bent, it'd be more likely to bend than break. And if it ever got bent, you could just hammer it back out with a flat rock. But at the time that the bronze comes into use, it just disappears from use in favor of the more familiar medieval studded, spiked, and flanged type of maces. So the question kind of is why, and of course we'd have to ask the people around then, and they're long dead. But it's a mistake to think of this as a failed experiment. This is not something that one or two people tried, it didn't work out, and they threw it away. This thing was popular for about 400 years. Now, let's put all that in perspective. Samuel Colt introduced the Patterson revolver in 1836. This is now 2025. So everything we know about modern handguns has existed for less than 200 years, almost 200 years, about half as long as this style of mace was popular and in use. So, oh, and then also consider average lifespan back then was probably about 30 years. And with a generation being 20 years, that means this thing lasted for 20 generations. So this thing was popular and in use, the style, the disc head style, for 20 generations, twice as long as all of modern handguns have existed. So it was a successful design. It was not a failed experiment. There were other reasons why it was replaced, but it was replaced. So I'm paying homage to that design with this, which you've seen how I make it already. And as you've seen from the demonstration, it actually is quite effective. So why do I call it a trench club? Let's get back to that. Because in the spirit of the World War I trench club, it was made with what I had available to produce what I need at the time. There's nothing elaborate about this. You'll notice I did not use a drill press, a CNC machine, a wood lathe, a welder, nothing like that. It's very simple construction. And that's really what typifies a real World War I trench mace or trench club. I've even seen a design, an artifact actually, in a museum that consisted of a gear taken out of some machine, stuck on the end of a stick, and there you are, there's your trench club. Now, some of them were more elaborate, and you'll find how to make those, a lot of them on YouTube. There's very good videos about making very nice looking, very pretty, very elaborate type of club, and those did exist. Some of those trenches had underground complexes that were very elaborate, and some even had fully equipped machine shops with their own electrical generators. But your typical soldier in the trenches did not have access to all that power equipment. They had to use what they had available by hand to just invent what they needed. And that's what I've done with this. So that's why I'm calling this a trench club. But if you want something with a little more oomph or a little more heft to it, you could go with something like this. Now, I made this at the same time I made this one. The materials and techniques are pretty much the same, so I didn't really call this out specifically when it was being made, and it doesn't really justify its own video. It's really not that complicated, but you can see it's really very simple. It's just a slightly thicker, shorter shaft. This is 1 1/8 inch instead of 3/4 of an inch. It has the same 3/4 inch butt nut here on it, or butt cap. And then for the front, we've simply got two 1-inch threaded iron couplings and a 1-inch threaded iron cap held onto the end with JB weld. This one measures in at 24 inches. This one measures in at 22 inches. They both weigh pretty much exactly the same, about 2.5 pounds, which incidentally is about the same weight as the Colt Model 1860 Army revolver. So they're both light, easy to carry for long periods of time. This one's got a little more reach to it, but when you look at, choke up on this and you hold this one by the business end, again, you can see they're pretty much about the same. This one I can extend a little bit for some more range, but typically I'd be holding it about here, and they're about the same. So I don't know that this one would do any more actual damage than this one will, because that disc is going to concentrate the force, whereas it's not going to be concentrated so much on this. This is more of just a brute force. It has got some good heft to it, though. I mean, this is a nice club. It's got some good momentum. It's light, it's maneuverable. easy to use. It's going to get the job done. And you know, having said all that, I have got to hit something with this.